Hi, this is Jeff Curto, and welcome to episode number 17 of Camera Position, a podcast about the creative side of photography. Well, obviously, all of those of you who are listening through subscription have made it over to the new RSS feed for Camera Position, and hope that's all working out for everybody. Let me know if it's not. And also, I'm hoping that some of you have made it over to the new Camera Position website, cameraposition.com, which is now set up as a blog so that comments can be left and suggestions can be made rather more easily. And I hope that more of you will continue to do that on into the future. So head on over to cameraposition.com. I'm also posting the some larger versions of the photographs on that site. And then also, don't forget, if you're listening in iTunes or listening/watching the podcast in iTunes, you can always click on that little thumbnail image in the lower left corner of iTunes and wind up with a much larger image, usually in the center of your screen. So please do take advantage of taking a look at the pictures that we're talking about in each episode of Camera Position. And this week, I'm going to kind of go in a slightly different direction. This week, I really want to talk about the idea of time and timing. And who better to use as an example for talking about that element of time, the element of timing in photography, but the great master of what he coined as the decisive moment, Henri Cartier-Bresson, the master of the 35 millimeter camera. Now, most of the photographs that I've talked about so far in Camera Position, in fact, all of them, I think, are have been made with large format equipment that requires a photographer to slow down and be contemplative, and that is certainly the kind of equipment that I am most used to using, and the type of photography that I like to do really in many ways depends on that large format camera. But with Cartier-Bresson, we look at the idea of the moment of composition, the moment that all of the elements in the frame come together to form a harmonious whole. This particular image, made in 1932 by Cartier-Bresson, is titled the name of the town that it was made in. And my French pronunciation is just pretty abysmal, so I'm going to presume that I'm going to be close with Jerez or Jerez. Boy, I hope somebody will give me a pronunciation clue on that. I kind of tried to Google the pronunciation for this, and I couldn't find one. So if somebody knows how to pronounce it properly, please let me know. But here is a photograph, and it points up a couple of elements about Bresson that I wanted to talk about a little bit here. And the idea here is that it isn't just this beautiful and rather vertiginous look down this staircase, but also obviously the bicyclist who is speeding by and is in just the most beautifully perfect position of all time. And the idea here, of course, is that Bresson would have been ready at the right moment, at the right time. And of course, I always like to think about Bresson really being ready just before the right moment, right? He has to be there to be able to see and frame the idea of the staircase and anticipate the bicyclist's movement around the curve in the road. And he has to be aware that this is all going to come together in this kind of harmonious whole. So he really has to be at the right point a little bit before the right time. So he kind of has to be a little prescient in terms of his ability to get to the right place at the right time. But, the other thing that this really points up is the idea of photographic editing. Because while I've never seen another Cartier-Bresson photograph that includes this same staircase with other elements in the scene, perhaps a couple strolling by or someone with a pushcart walking by, it certainly is likely that Bresson stood there in this position and made a number of photographs of this particular scene, this particular idea, noticing, of course, that there was something about this staircase and its undulating lines and the repetition of the balusters on the staircase, the repetition of the risers and treads on the stairs itself, Uh, but the idea that something was going to come into the frame and something was going to make a photograph happen. And so my take on this is that Bresson was likely standing at the top of the staircase, looking at it and realizing that a photograph could be made there, and the idea that eventually he could make an image that would make some sense visually. And of course, the speeding bicyclist and the choice of shutter speed that slightly blurs the bicyclist, really imparting the sense of motion in an otherwise static scene, is just a masterful stroke. And of course, if you've read much about Bresson, you know that people who knew him recognized that he was kind of constantly recomposing you, the person he was speaking with the background, because he was always sort of looking at the world as if he were looking through a camera. He talked about the camera as being an extension of his eye, a method of recording the things that he saw. So, a guy who was very visually acute, but also another element about Bresson that I think is worth mentioning and is, I think, quite valid and valuable for photographers to think about is here is a guy who didn't really think too much about technology. Certainly, he used a camera, one of the first and most masterful users of the small format 35 millimeter camera. He used a camera, but it wasn't about the mechanics of the camera. It was about sort of mastering those mechanics and putting that technology in his back pocket and being able to make the photographs on the fly as he needed to make them. And so the notion here is that we need to, as people who make artistic statements with mechanical objects, we need to be able to be masters of those mechanical objects. We need to be able to be so familiar with them that we can do the sort of thing that Cartier-Bresson would do when a cloud would scud between the sun and the earth. He would instinctively reach down and open up the lens a stop or a stop and a half to compensate for that change in lighting. So the idea is that vision is always in service of the technology, but that the technology really shouldn't be the thing that kind of drives us. In fact, we should be driving the technology by making sure that we are consistently mastering that technology instead of letting the technology really be the master of what we do. So get out that camera manual, make sure you understand all of the features that your camera has, and make sure that you understand what all of the buttons and dials and switches do so that you can concentrate on the visual aspects of the medium. Because I'm here to tell you that I don't really think Cartier-Bresson spent a whole lot of time thinking through the idea of depth of field and how much he'd need and the focus and all of those things. Certainly he thought about them, but he thought about them in a fraction of a second so that he could react in the moment that it was necessary to make this beautiful, decisive moment photograph. Again, that phrase that Bresson coined to describe what it was that his photographs were all about. Well, thank you very much for listening, and those of you who have subscribed, thank you very much for subscribing, and go and visit cameraposition.com, leave a comment, or drop me a note at jeff@jeffcurto.com. Let me know what you're thinking. What kind of photography do you like? What sorts of things do you have in mind for your work in the medium of photography? So drop by cameraposition.com or send me a note, and I will look forward to hearing from you. Thanks again, and keep listening, and go make some photographs.